Hey, you all, welcome to Pearls of Eden. My name is Marilyn Acosta, and today I have an inspiring story to share with you all. Don't we all just love to be inspired and encouraged to know that we can be all things through Christ Jesus? And no matter where your beginnings are or where you started, that when God has a plan over your life, no one can come against it, but we have to incorporate God into our lives. And I love the story. Today we're going to talk about the story of Ben Carson. I'm going to let him share his story before we begin, but it's quite fascinating. You know, Ben Carson, I am very hopeful that he will be the pick for Donald Trump as his vice president. He is such a humble man. I think he would be the perfect balance for President Trump. And he's so loyal. And then President Trump has that loyal character as well. And I just think that they would be the dynamic duo, the perfect balance for one another. But Ben Carson, his story is so intriguing. It's so inspiring. There are men of God that you look at their story and you just like, oh my gosh, like Dr. Miles Monroe and people like Les Brown, where their beginnings could have caused them to end up in a place where it would not have been fruitful, but by God's grace, He causes them to prosper. And I just want to encourage mothers and fathers, it's not about where you begin or how much money you have, but the Bible says when we instruct our children in the Lord, that is the most priceless gift that you can have, is being an example of the word and teaching it to your children. Did y'all see that? So, Holy Spirit's presence is all in this, right? And as I share this word with you today, I pray that it blesses you, his story, and it inspires you that all things are possible through Christ Jesus. Take a listen to Ben Carson and his story.
I feel that the Lord has given me the spectacular medical career to provide a platform from which to do things that are much more important, because you can really only affect one life at a time in the operating room, maybe two if it's Siamese twins. But when you get out on the stage, and with public speaking, with books, with interviews, there's so many lives that can be touched, and there's so many people who live in desperation from day to day, focusing on the wrong kinds of things and not realizing that tremendous potential that lies within each normal human brain.
Well, I'm blessed to see this because I read that the only pressure you embraced was self-imposed, and that was an obligation to act as a role model for Black youth. Mm. Wow.
And that has expanded. My horizons have risen really to the whole world now. I grew up obviously as a Black youth, and seeing the enormous pressures and misrepresentations that were going on that distorted people's thinking. But as I've grown and become a citizen of the world, I've come to realize that affects everybody in every environment, and that like Jesus Christ, we must be concerned about all of our fellow men. And one of the things that I came to realize as a neurosurgeon, of course, when I go into the operating room and I open the scalp and I open the skull and I'm looking at the brain, I realize that this is the thing that makes this person who they are. It's not the covering. The covering really is relatively unimportant. But what is really important is that thing that's there that embodies who they are, their personality and their potential. And that's what we need to concentrate on.
Well, it didn't look as if you were loaded with potential in that early childhood. And I think that little 5'3" mom had a lot to do with where things went.
Married at age 13. She was one of 24 children. Moved from rural Tennessee. She was trying to escape what seemed like an untenable situation. They moved to Detroit, and then, of course, she discovered that her husband was a bigamist, had another family. And that, of course, was a devastating blow. And they got divorced. We moved to Boston to live with her older sister and brother-in-law. Typical tenement, large multifamily dwelling. Sirens, gangs, rats, roaches. Both of my older cousins were murdered. I never expected to live beyond 25. It was just a horrible environment.
And yet, and she had difficulties too. She was overwhelmed at times and had to go into a psychiatric
Yes.
institution. But she shielded you from so much. And you say she brainwashed you. What did she tell you repeatedly, you boys, you and your older brother,
Well,
Curtis?
she always told us that anything anybody else can do, you can do, except you can do it better.
And she said, ask the Lord to help you.
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful.
And, when I asked, can I be a doctor? She says, Benny, you can be a doctor or anything else you want to be, as long as you work hard and you trust in God.
And you had so much to overcome. Dr. Carson, you prayed every night that your dad would return, getting this terrible news at age 8 that he would never be coming home.
That's correct. And that's absolutely devastating for a young person, especially young boys, no matter what their dad's doing, he's sort of like the hero. And that he wasn't coming back, I just couldn't fathom that. So I was constantly praying somehow that the Lord would help us to surmount this, what seemed to be an insurmountable obstacle. But, years later, when I look back on the situation, I knew exactly why it had happened, because his value system and the value system of my mother were very, very different. And, for him, important things would have been womanizing and being out drinking and drugs and all kinds of things. And I'm sure that had that influence been in my life, I would not be sitting here today.
Age 8, the very same year, as I understand, the very same year you had this emotional devastation, you received a chemistry set. Somebody said, blessed be the hand that prepares a pleasure for a child, for there is no saying where or when it may bloom forth.
That's right.
That chemistry set had something to do with the dream you embraced right there to be a doctor, initially a missionary doctor.
Exactly. Well, there was something about being able to do all those experiments and to create new kinds of things, maybe, and to do things that nobody had ever done before. And, it stimulated something deep within me. And I think that had a profound effect on my desire to become a physician.
And your mom was all for it, encouraging you, but you had some other hurdles to overcome. And I'm fast tracking a little bit, but...
Yeah. Well, I had a horrendous temper.
Oh, that too. I was going to go for the marks, but let's start with let's go for the marks first.
Well, I was
grade 5, it was the issue first.
I was a terrible student.
Bottom of the class.
Absolutely. I didn't think that I was very smart. All my classmates were in agreement with me.
You just concluded you were dumb.
Yeah. And there was really no point in even trying, because I just didn't understand, what was going on. So it was much more fun to shoot paper wads and tell jokes.
2 important things happened to turn your worldview around.
Yes. One of them was we had some medical people come in and do an eye exam. Because I didn't know that everybody else didn't see the way I did. I thought no one could see. So, the thought that anybody could see the blackboard was just an amazing thing to me. And
so you got glasses.
I got glasses, and I went from a F student to a D student, and I was delighted.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother wasn't very happy about it. She says, "Why would you be happy about that?" I said, "Well, I didn't fail. I got a D." She said, "Oh, this is horrible."
So that little trooper mom had a plan of her own. What was her strategy for you?
Well, she worked as a domestic, cleaning other people's homes. And one of the things that she noticed is that very successful people didn't spend all their time watching television and goofing off, and that they did a lot of reading and studying. So
leaders are readers.
Absolutely.
Charles Tremendous Jones, I'll never forget.
So after praying for wisdom, she came up with the idea of only allowing us to watch 2 or 3 TV programs during the week.
That didn't sit well, did it?
No, we thought that was child abuse. But at any rate, we had to substitute all that time reading 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries and submitting to her written book reports, which she couldn't read. But of course, we didn't know that. She would put little check marks and underlines and highlights and stuff. But interestingly enough, even though I just hated it in the beginning, it wasn't long before I got to the point where I couldn't wait to get home to read my books because, we lived in a pretty horrible environment, but between the covers of those books, I could go any place, I could be anybody, I could do anything. I was conducting experiments and discovering new microcosms. And, it wasn't long before I began to know things that nobody else knew. And
The
that
very kids that were teasing you
exactly
started coming to you for
and
insights.
asking me, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. And I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it was so much fun. And it used to really bother me, poverty. I hated being poor. I would get out of the line, when I was buying stuff at the store because I don't want people to see me using food stamps. And of course, if I thought about it a little deeper, I would realize they probably had food stamps too. But at any rate, once I started reading, and particularly reading about people who changed their own lives and the lives of people around them, who became empowered, and I realized that I could do that too, poverty didn't bother me anymore because now I said, it's only temporary. I can do anything I want. I don't have to stay here in this environment. And it was wonderful.
At age 8, I skipped something important. You made a significant spiritual decision. You trusted in Christ.
Right.
But you've already alluded to another crisis, an unfriendly companion that emerged as your teen years started to blossom. You would need big hands to help you.
I had a horrendous temper. I would just fly off the handle. I would try to hurt people.
You nearly killed your friend.
Yes, I almost stabbed a friend with a knife. The only thing that saved him is that he had on a very large metal belt buckle underneath his clothing, and the knife blade struck it with such force that it broke. And I was horrified, and I ran into the bathroom, I locked myself in, and I just started contemplating, because by that time, I had turned things around academically. I was an A student, but I still had this temper, and I realized I was never going anywhere with a temper like that except jail, reform school, or the grave. And I just fell on my knees and I said, Lord, you got to help me. I cannot control my temper. And I said, if you don't fix this, it's all over for me. And I stayed in that bathroom for 3 hours praying and contemplating. There was a Bible in there, and I picked it up. And I turned it to the book of Proverbs, and there were all these verses about anger and how much trouble it gets you into. Proverbs 19:19 says there's no point in getting an angry man out of trouble because he's just going to get right back into it. But there are verses like Proverbs 16:32 that says, mightier is the man who can control his temper than the man who can conquer a city. And it seems like they were all written for me. And I realized while I was in there that, lashing out, kicking down a door, what have you, that's not a sign of strength. It's a sign of weakness. It means that environment and other people can control you. And I decided to step out of the center of the equation and move myself to the periphery and to begin to look in and be able to see the big picture. And it completely changed my life. When I walked out of that bathroom, the temper was gone. I've never had another problem with it since that day.
You embraced a song for your heart at that time. I don't know if you still sing it. Jesus is all the world to me. My life, my soul, my all.
And that is something that strengthens me. When I go into the operating room and I have a difficult case to do, or even if I have a simple case to do, I always pray. I always ask God for wisdom. And when I'm operating, I can tell when other people are praying too. I can absolutely tell. And it makes all the difference in the world. And, some people, they make all this big deal about all these complex surgeries that I've done. But the fact of the matter is, I know me better than anybody in the world, and I know that I'm not all that great, but I know that there's a source of greatness that's behind me that allows these things to be done. And that really is a source of comfort.
We can't overlook what those gifted hands do. We have a picture of one of the famous sets of Siamese twins detailed in this book. I think the groundbreaking case is the German twins. These are Zambian?
Those are the Banda twins from Zambia. They were type 2 vertical craniopagus twins. Never before have those type been separated with neurological intactness, but it was a 28-hour operation. It was done in South Africa, and I'm happy to say that this year they graduated from the 5th grade, doing extremely well.
I know the German twins, you didn't expect them to live 24 hours. That was a 22-hour surgery.
Absolutely.
5 months in preparation?
Yes, because we used a hypothermic arrest. At the critical point in the operation, we stopped their hearts, pumped all the blood out of their bodies, so that we could try to reconstruct the vascular channels, and then pump the blood back in, start the hearts back up. It was quite an amazing feat.
You and your colleagues perform some of the most complex neurosurgical procedures known
Correct.
in the industry today, in the medical field. You have to, first of all, have steady hands.
That helps.
And I would think nerves of steel.
You know, there really are not a whole lot of things that one has to be afraid of when one has the kind of brain that we have. We have these fabulous things sitting up here, which can process more than 2 million bits of information per second, which remember everything we've ever seen, everything we've ever heard. And with that, there are very few things that we cannot overcome. When problems come up, as long as we don't have blinders on, we can figure out another way to do things. We can figure out a better way to do things. And when you think about people of accomplishment throughout history, they are people who take risk. They are not people who just sit around waiting for things to happen.
Okay, I got to butt in here, though. You make the point in the book that we have a risk avoidance culture.
Yes.
And feelings are facts. We don't live in a safe world anymore, Dr. Carson.
No,
and,
no, we don't.
You know, I think fear factor is a real deal, even without the spiders.
Yeah.
There are so many things to be insecure about and fearful about.
Except that we have kind of allowed it to get out of hand now. And we're fearful of things that we don't need to be fearful of. Every time, you know, we hear on the news about, you know, an outbreak of salmonella or botulism, you know, we go into a frenzy. And, you know, some of us, if you hear about an airplane crash, you know, oh, I'm afraid to get on an airplane. Of course, not recognizing that your chances of dying in an airplane crash are so incredibly small. You go out and you get in your car and you're driving down the street not realizing that 1 in every 25 people you meet is legally intoxicated behind that wheel. Your chances of dying or being injured are much greater, but you don't even give it a second thought. And it's a matter of putting those things into perspective and not allowing the fear factor to begin to change the way that we behave and the way that we do things in life.
And it hasn't just been brain power that's propelled you. You have answered prayer throughout your journey. Let me just cap a couple of things here. Early acceptance into the neurosurgery department after a year of internship, 6 years of residency. You didn't want to do 2 years of general surgery. Is that just boring for
Well,
you?
it wasn't so much that it was boring as I didn't fit with the traditional Halstead model.
Oh.
Which was very regimented and, you know, I did it this way, you got to do it that way. You know, you've been working all night long. You miss getting one thing done. The only question asked you is, did you have an opportunity to go to the bathroom? Then you should have been able to get it done. Yeah, I just didn't fit my persona. So I was going to leave. I wasn't going to do the second year.
But God had moved in.
God moved in, and he caused the chairman of neurosurgery to say, look, we'll take you after only 1 year of general surgery. So, you know, that worked out okay in my
Fairly
favor.
unprecedented, I'm sure. And you were risking, tell us about.
Well, one of the big risks, of course, was in medical school. Because, you know, when I entered medical school, you know, I thought I was pretty smart. I graduated from Yale, you know, it was pretty good. And I did terribly on the first set of comprehensive exams. And I was sent to see my counselor, and he looked over my record and he said, you know, you seem like a very intelligent young man. He says, I bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine. And he tried to encourage me to drop out of medical school. He said, you've only wasted 6 weeks. You're obviously not cut out to be a doctor. We'll help you get into another field, and you'll be happier, and everybody else will be too. And this is the person who's supposed to be helping me. So, I went back to my apartment and I thought about it. And then I really started thinking about the risk. I said, they're willing to help me get into another field. But the only thing that I have ever wanted to do is be a doctor. So am I going to risk rejecting their advice? And I decided to pray and ask God to give me the wisdom to know what to do. And I started thinking, what kind of courses have I done well in? What kind of courses have I struggled in? And I saw a correlation. I realized that I did very well in courses where I did a lot of reading, not so well in courses where I listened to a lot of boring lectures, because I don't get anything out of boring lectures. And there I was listening to 8 hours worth of boring lectures every day. So I made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures
And read it for
and to
yourself.
spend that time reading. The rest of medical school was a snap after that. And when I came back to that medical school as the commencement speaker, I was looking for that counselor because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be a counselor.
Oh, your journey is just peppered with these amazing things. Uh, the teenage boy who was nearly beaten to death with a baseball bat.
Yes,
You found yourself in a situation that we often see in television scenarios
yes.
where the right person to do something was unavailable. You'd called everywhere.
It was during the time of a national neurosurgical meeting, so all the attendings were there except for the one person who was covering, and we couldn't reach him. And this young man had come into the emergency room, had been severely beaten with a baseball bat. His brain was swelling. He was herniating. He was going to die. I was a resident in my 4th year, not allowed to take a patient to the operating room without an attending. And yet, here I faced this situation. And, I had to ask myself, what's most important here? My career or this person's life? And I made the decision to take that young man to the operating room without an attending and to open up his skull and to take out his frontal lobe and to take out his temporal lobe, which created enough room for the swelling.
Can you live without those two things?
You can, if it's done the correct way. I'd never done it before, but I'd seen it done. And
Yikes.
it turned out okay. I met that young man many years later. He came up to me to thank me. He said, I'm a psychologist for the public school system, and I owe my life to you. But it was the willingness to take that risk. And I make the point that in order to know what kind of risks to take, you have to know who you are. You have to know what your values are. Now, if the most important thing to you or to me had been at that time my reputation and doing everything by the letter, that young man would have been dead. But if the most important thing was saying, why am I a physician? Why am I here? Is it to save this person under these circumstances? Then I'm going to make a very different choice.
Dr. Carson, I'd love to tell some more of the medical stories, but I love that you say parenting is the greatest job.
Absolutely.
You're a father of
3.
3 children,
Yeah.
3 boys.
Yeah.
You delivered Benjamin Jr. at home, not planned.
Not
That's
planned.
an exciting story.
I just caught him on the way out.
Really? You say we cannot protect our kids from all risk, and we shouldn't even try.
Exactly. Because, I get asked this question all the time, by parents after their kid has had brain surgery. Should I keep him from doing this and this and that? And I said, first of all, you can't keep him from doing it. He's going to do it anyway, because that's the nature of kids. So forget about that. All you're going to do is stress yourself out. But, children, and particularly as they begin to mature, there's something in them that makes them exploratory, makes them curious, makes them want to push the edges, makes them want to see what's on the other side for them. And they're going to do it. So forget about stopping them. But what I suggested for parents is understand and recognize that this desire to take risk occurs. So try to create safe risk that they can take. They work just as well Give them some structured activities, supervised, that allow them to take risk and to push the edges of
They
their
can still
capabilities.
adventure.
They can still adventure. It works just as well. But if you don't do it, and particularly if you ignore them, and they begin to find that they have to gain their identity through their peer group, some of the risks that they wind up taking are not going to be the ones that you want. And that's how so many of our young people end up in the penal system, in the juvenile justice system, in hospitals, crippled for life. And it's just totally unnecessary. But
Or you could become, as you pointed out in the book, a hovering, like a helicopter parent.
exactly.
Drive teachers crazy.
Well, not only does it drive teachers crazy, but I've seen it drive the kids crazy too. And then the kids then become fearful of everything. And there's nothing that disappoints me more than a little kid who's fearful of everything, because I know that that's somebody who's never going to accomplish anything in life.
I'd like us to see, the very first time I saw you interviewed, you were telling us about Think Big. And this was a huge seller. And this really is about unleashing our potential for excellence.
Right.
It's pretty much your life philosophy in an acrostic.
Yes, it is. Each one of those letters means something special. The T is for talent, which God gave to every single person. And by that, I don't just mean the ability to sing and dance and throw a ball, but I'm talking about intellectual talent. And we must begin to pay much more attention to intellectual talent, particularly here in the Western world, as we move further and further into the technological age. We can't continue to think that we're going to remain the pinnacle through our agricultural prowess or our industrial prowess.
Can I just, on this point, I know one of your passions is, and this isn't to denigrate sports careers or the music stars, but particularly among young people today, there's a big push to go for those flashy careers with
Right.
the big paychecks.
Exactly. And what people don't understand is, only 1 in 10,000 makes it any big way in the entertainment industry. And all you got to do, even if you are one of those who makes it, go to Las Vegas or someplace like that and walk into those little dingy smoke-filled lounges and see those people up there trying to get people to remember who they were. It's pretty miserable. And, with the sports, only 7 in 1 million will make it as a starter in the NBA. What happened to the other 999,993? And less than 1% of people who go to college on an athletic scholarship end up playing professional sports. The average career span, if you do make it into professional sports, is only 3.5 years. The average salary 5 years after that career is over, $20,000 to $25,000. Because the appropriate education hasn't been had. So, I wish there was a program called Lifestyles of the Formerly Rich and Famous, which came on every day, and our young people could see that. But so I have nothing against it. But I want us to start emphasizing the intellectual talent. The H is for honesty, clean, honest life, no skeletons in the closet. And if you always tell the truth, you don't have to try to remember what you said 3 months ago. It uncomplicates your life. The I is for insight, which comes from listening to people who've already gone where you're trying to go. Learn from their triumphs, learn from their mistakes. The N is for nice. Be nice to people, because once they get over their suspicion of why you're being nice, they'll be nice to you. You can get so much more done. And can you imagine what kind of society we could have if people thought about others first? The K is for knowledge, which is the thing that makes you into a more valuable person. And, I do have a lot of the things that the world thinks are great, but if all of those things disappeared, it really doesn't matter. Why? First of all, I can get them all right back almost immediately with what's up here, which is what Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, meant when he said gold, silver, and rubies are nice, but be treasured far above those knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, because he knew with those you could get all the gold and silver and rubies you wanted. But more importantly, you'd come to understand they don't amount to a hill of beans, and that the most important thing is developing your God-given talents to the point where you become valuable to the people around you. That's what real success is all about. The B is for books, which is the mechanism for obtaining that knowledge. Some people say, I can learn everything I need to learn by watching DVDs and videos. That's like saying you can develop your muscles by watching somebody else lift weights. It doesn't work that way. You got to use your brain if you want it to work for you. The second I is for in-depth learning, learning for the sake of knowledge and understanding, as opposed to superficial learning. And the last letter, G, is for God. We live in a society that is progressively trying to kick God out. He's not